On February the 14th this year, the Academic Staff Union of Universities embarked on a nationwide strike to press home about 8 demands from the federal government to make lives easier for academic staff across the country. Some of its demands include funding for the revitalization of public universities and academic allowance, poor funding of state universities, and promotion arrears. After several attempts at resolving this issue, they decided to go on an indefinite strike, saying the government must yield to all their demands. Finally, a headway has been made following a meeting with the executive members of the union, where they decided to suspend the strike after 8 months. Joining us via Zoom from Abuja is Public Affairs Analyst and the Program Director, Dataphyte Adenike Aloba. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's get your impressions of Asuu's decision to suspend this strike.
I think it's about time, because I think whatever they were holding out for, obviously it did not come through in the first 8 months of the year. It had become clear to everyone that everybody had to shift grounds a little bit. We don't yet have the full details of the negotiations that led to the suspension of this strike, but I think everyone can agree that it's about time for the strike to be called off. 8 months is a long time for students to be sitting at home and for our institutions to be locked up. So yes, when we have the details, we'll know what was agreed and what was argued back and forth. But I think it makes sense, and it's about time for the strike to be called off.
Well, I was earlier in the program quoting a line from a poem, a ballad. It was the Ballad of Sir Andrew, which said, I'm struck and wounded, I lay me down and rest a while, but I rise and fight again. Now, does this sound like that? That they have just been beaten and they've struck and they are wounded and they are waiting to nurse their wounds so that they will fight again?
Honestly, again, I may not describe it exactly like that, because we do not know what was agreed yet in that room. The federal government has promised a circular, Asuu has promised a press release. We're waiting for that. But even if that is the positioning, let's assume, oh yeah, we fought this long and now there's a Yoruba saying that says, he who lives to fight another day, really. And this may well be the case of he who lives to fight another day. Are they wounded and having to re-strategize? Perhaps not wounded, but one thing is clear. There's a need to re-strategize. There's a need to rethink. Are these strike actions effective? To what extent are they effective? Are we getting the answers that we need to get? So maybe they're not mortally wounded and, bleeding, but the one thing that is, clear is there is a rethinking and a rising again to fight another day.
Interesting. And we are hoping to see how that will pan out at the end of the day in terms of fighting to ensure the revitalization of universities, because this is one aspect that they have been speaking about. But let's look at what has happened leading up to the call for the suspension of this strike. The government's intervention thus far, we had seen the Minister of Labor coming to intervene one way or the other, and later we saw the Minister of Education also coming to have a conversation with these persons, and we eventually saw the leadership of the House of Representatives led by the Speaker, Femi Gbajabiamila, which led to what we are seeing somewhat now. I wonder what you make of how the government handled this matter through the 8 months.
So, to be honest, I think that there might have been, or at least the way it is interpreted to those of us who are watching from the outside, it almost felt like the federal government was not quite as bothered about the fact that the schools were shut. And that position might well be established by the fact that several agreements had been signed and there have been several defaults. which again questions the sincerity of the government when it comes to sign these deals and the sincerity of the government when it says, oh, suspend the strike, we're going to take these actions. It does make one wonder, do we really care about the education, the educational sector? Do we really care about the children who are impacted by this problem? It was difficult to find one singular thread of what government was thinking. It was difficult to find, oh, this is where the government's head is. It was difficult to find a quote, a press statement that detailed government's positions, what they were or they were not, what they were or they were not doing around the Asuu strike or around the demands of Asuu. So it does feel a little bit like the government was passive. The reasons for their passivity may differ. There have been conversations that, look, however we think about it, it's not sustainable for government to continue to fund education. However we think about it, we're going to have to rethink revitalization of our educational sector. But the challenge was that there was no clear communication from the government of what their position is, not just saying, oh, we're negotiating, or we're talking to them, they don't want to talk back at us, but actually letting us know where your head is. What are you thinking? What are you proposing? What are the counter arguments that you're making? It was difficult to find, that thing that you could say, oh yeah, this is the government's position, which would make you feel then that perhaps the government was passive, almost tilting towards apathy throughout this 8-month period.
It is hard to accept everything you just said, because the government announced that as far as salary was concerned, which was also a critical part of the negotiations, that they gave a particular salary that they wanted the ASU professors to earn and what lecturers should earn. They gave that point, and they said that there was the Briggs Commission that was agreed to by a previous government in 2009, and they said that they didn't have enough money to communicate that, and even the minister himself said we have given them an offer, but they've not given us counter offer. So what we want is counter offer, and Asuu said there's no need for a counter offer because the offer came from a body that was already appointed by government, not this government but the previous government. So then even the Minister of Education said they had agreed on everything with the Asuu except backlog of salaries. And Asuu came back and said, we didn't agree on anything. So the thing actually is that neither government nor Asuu was very clear about what was going on, because we don't even have the minutes of this discussion. None of this side was actually very transparent in telling us the details of conversation. All we had is we have not agreed, we have agreed. In fact, you could say that the government was even more forthcoming about figures than Asuu has been.
Are you still there?
Are you there?
Adenike Aloba, are you there?
So here's the thing. There is one body. Yes, Asuu should communicate better. They should be clearer. Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
We can hear you now.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I was saying that here is one thing. Yes, there were conversations about what was agreed, or we had agreed, we had not agreed. I think the point I was making was we were not, what are the government thoughts about the future of education? If you're insisting, look, we don't have the money to finance this thing, what is your plan? However we think about it, it's not as if there's some utopia world where the government says, oh yeah, we're stepping out of education, universities figure it out yourself. That can happen outside the communication or outside the actions of government. But here is the thing. Asuu is a body that we did not vote into power, if you can think of it that way. There is one body that owes us, that actually has the responsibility, the bigger responsibility of clear communication, of attempting to address the needs or the questions or the bothers in the hearts of the people, and that's the government. So if we are everyone agrees that both parties, their communication was poor, but if we're weighing whose actions has more impact, and who should have been more responsive, more open, more forthcoming with information, with, look, this is what we're thinking, these are the strategies that we want to take to achieve it, then really we look to government. We can advise ASU on how to better communicate for its own agendas and for what it wants to do. But really, the government owes us clearer communication, at the very least, to bolster the confidence of students who were just sitting at home and not figuring things out. You know, sometimes we watch the news and we see NANs, for instance, discussing these issues. But really, the representation we see in the news, in reports, does not quite cover the devastation of this action on everyday Nigerians, on everyday students. So yes, some people were speaking, there were some noise on social media, but the government owed a responsibility to its people to be clear about its propositions, but not just about its propositions, to show us a pathway, to show us, look, this is what, if Asuu is not going to come out and say, oh, this is what was discussed, these are the lines, and these are the full stops, and these are the commas, and these are the issues or the challenges we have with what the government is proposing, the government should be able to tell us that. ASU does not owe us that. We'll be glad that ASU communicates better. We'll be glad that ASU positions itself better, positions its communication better. But the person we hold accountable really is government.
But some would disagree with you on the fact that ASU does not owe us that, because it was calling on parents and students and everyone to support its fight to what is demanding of government. So if they are not speaking to us, how then do we support them? How then do we support their fight for these demands that they are making from government?
I think it's really about the question of who has the greater burden of communication. Now, ASU is soliciting for us to support them. If they don't communicate clearly enough, what they lose out on is our support. But government has a responsibility to be clear in its communication to us. It's not a, oh, come join us situation. It's not a, oh, we want you to support us situation. It's that they owe a responsibility. If ASU had communicated better, perhaps they could have captured the imagination of of more Nigerians and sustained their fight, or perhaps they could even have benefited from diversity and diversity of opinions and ideas and strategies around what they could do. But here is the point: who has the greater burden? Who has the greater responsibility of communication? I would say that is government. They should have communicated clearer. And when I say communication here, I'm not just referring to the letters of what is agreed or what was said in meetings and the point of disagreement. I think that this was a missed opportunity to give us a clearer vision of what the government is seeing or envisioning, or the strategy they have for the future of education in Nigeria. It was a missed opportunity. They could have done better. They could have reinforced their agenda. The point is, where that is missing, then you're leaving us to assume that the government has no strategy when it comes to revitalizing education in Nigeria.
Well, in a sense, I agree with you that the government has not had any strategy for revitalizing education, rather than just throw money there. And it says it has no money, and they told the ASU people that the money you're asking for, we don't have. And the ASU people keep saying that you have the money. But it looks like the ASU people have actually won out in this argument, because from the feelers we are getting about the agreement they had with the Speaker of the House of Representatives is that the budget for next year is going to really accommodate the sum of money that they have been crying for, which means that the problem with the government has been that it has not really prioritize the issue of funding education, but it also speaks to the absence of communication even between them. Because if they knew that this was going to happen, if they knew that this was possible, this kind of money was possible for next year, but next year budget, couldn't they have communicated it, and couldn't ASU also have spoken in the same kind of language with them? So I see that there's really an absence of communication. That's why I said that they were involved in some kind of Kafka's dialogue, rather than having a dialogue between a well-intentioned group and another well-intentioned group, that both of them went to the table with like cats and dogs, and they were soured into the words, and they soured out of the meetings. That it was not a conversation, but it was a dialogue between rival housewives.
So I mean, I do not disagree with you in saying that these things could have been resolved, quicker if you are simply going to increase, budget provisions for education. Just say that at the very beginning, and then we might as well all just go back home and we wouldn't have 8 months of students sitting at home. But here's the thing about development issues: they're always interconnected. Now, government is promising to increase allocation to education, but there's a bigger issue that Nigeria's budget is funded by debt. So essentially, what government is promising in the real sense of the word is, well, we'll figure out a way to allocate more of the borrowed funds to education. On the surface, as a stopgap to end this strike action, yes, that's a good decision. There's a recommendation of a percentage that should be going to education from a country's budget. But here's the thing: is that action sustainable? Right now, Nigeria is at 5.1% debt to GDP, which is higher than the threshold of 3%. So is that a sustainable solution? Which then means that if it's not a sustainable solution and Nigeria doesn't figure out a way to plug its revenue, the gaping revenue holes that we have, and stop itself from borrowing and borrowing and borrowing to fund its government, then the reality is we might be here again in 2023 having the same argument, with the government saying, oh, we don't have the money, and I'm saying, yes, you have the money, because essentially there's a bigger problem of revenue. The development problems are always interconnected. They're always, and that's the thing. If we solve one small one, we have to figure out the ripple effect, the domino effect on the several other issues that are connected. Now that the federal government is promising, oh, we'll increase allocation to education, there is no corresponding communication on improving the government's revenue to accommodate this promise that they have made. So what happens when by 2023, middle of 2023, it becomes unsustainable? Nigeria's debt has been rising to alarming levels. I think that's the way to describe it already. So what happens when the funds are not available to fulfill this promise that they have made? Because really, there is a clear revenue challenge, which is why I think that, yes, we agree totally that we needed something, some way, some shift on both sides to end, this strike. But we need a long view. We need a strategy, because obviously government simply pouring money into the educational sector is not sustainable. There has to be some other way, some other strategy.
Right.
Admittedly, it's not that government will completely remove its hand, but it is that there has to be a more sustainable way of revitalizing our educational sector.
What you're saying in essence, essentially, is that the strike is not going to be a strike of Asuu for Asuu, but it's going to be a strike against bad governance, against debts that is not there. In other words, the strike, the grievances of the strike are going to confirm what the government is saying, that they have no money. So you are striking not for education, you are striking against bad governance, which means that Asuu is carrying a burden that is not supposed to carry in a strike.
Should be shared a lot more broader, that a conversation that should be had from different perspectives and from different angles. As is always the case when you have a described as finding its feet, of a 60-plus-year-old man struggling to find its feet, but that's where Nigeria is. And so the problems are not just Asuu problems. Now we're thinking, how do we make sure that government is not, just blowing our money?
But there's so much to still talk about with regards to this matter, because even the president, I think while he was presenting the budget before the Senate, said that the government cannot fund education alone. And I wanted to get her perspective, because she was talking about what other aspect, there has to be some other ways to addressing this matter of revitalization. I hear you are back online. Abiola Aloba, can you hear me?
Hi.
Right.
Yes,
now,
hi.
Now, quickly, the president was speaking about the fact that the federal government cannot handle the aspect of financing education alone, because you've been talking about looking at other ways of addressing this matter. And I'm wondering what ways you think we can look at funding the education that can eventually lead to the revitalization of our educational system.
Yes. So you're correct, and I agree with the president that it's not sustainable for them to fund education the way we have done it across the world. In most developed countries of the world, there's a mixed model. That includes loans.
She was pointing out the aspect of loans.
Loans given to
students.
To students, not only students, but also to universities. Universities get money to run their institutions. I've said this before that if you look at the top 10 universities in the world, they're usually mostly funded by private initiative, not government initiatives, whether it's Harvard, whether it's Oxford, whether it's Princeton, Berkeley, Stanford. Most of these universities have a lot of their funding coming from private initiatives and entrepreneurial outreach. They charge fees. We're trying to get Oloyede to come here to come and talk about this new proposal that that JAMB should not depend on federal government subvention. That it can live through the charges for the wards that they write the exams and so on. Those are the kind of models that we can do. That students should be able to pay, and universities should be able to find other ways to generate funding. But Asuu has said that the legal strictures will not help them to even fulfill that kind of obligation. That any money that comes to them have to go through some pause, they cannot even access it, and even if they make the money, it's not their money. So they need some of these legal strictures to be loosened. But it takes the courage of the institutions for them to even fight it and get it out. Because if the Constitution says that the terms of engagement say that they are free, then all they need to do is to assert that freedom. Absolutely. And they can do that by any university can just start by taking the matter to court and get its own judgment, and itself will set the whole thing free. But rather than that, the idea of Asuu itself working together and becoming cumbersome in the way it carries its job together cannot even make it think about it, because some of the Asuu, I'm sorry to say, some of the Asuu people are still thinking in the totalitarian sense, the ideological, the ancient ideological sense in which universities have to be run like it used to be run like in the Soviet Union in those days, where everything is ideological, it's Marxist, everything must come from government, from the state, and so on. They have to free themselves. They need a new generation of university teachers who can really run universities in the modern way.
With new ideas, because perhaps this is why CONUA, the rival faction, is talking about there are other ways, that strike is not the only way to addressing matters. There are other ways to address issues that will lead to the revitalization of universities. But we must thank Public Affairs Analyst and Program Director Dataphyte Adenike Aloba for her time on the program.